Good evening. 1,001 days ago, the West Country voted to leave the European Union. A week tomorrow, our departure date is set. Or is it? Up for discussion tonight. Theresa May blames MPs for a delay to Brexit and calls it a matter of great personal regret. The North Somerset MP joins Brexit-supporting cabinet ministers urging the PM against a long delay. And 5 MPs in Devon and Cornwall change their minds to support Theresa May's deal. Will more follow? Joining me for tonight's West Country debate. For Labour, we have the Bristol East MP, Kerry McCarthy. Alongside her and representing the Liberal Democrats, the Bath MP, Vera Hobhouse, and the Camborne and Redruth Conservative MP, George Eustice, who recently stood down as Fishing and Farming Minister. Thank you all for coming in. Well, tonight, Theresa May is in Brussels, trying to woo EU leaders to grant her an extension to our departure from the Union, even though more than half of her MPs voted against a Brexit delay last week, including most West Country Tories. Yesterday, though, she sent a letter requesting the delay. And in the letter, she told the President of the European Council the House of Commons voted against leaving the EU without a negotiated deal. If the motion is passed, I'm confident that Parliament will proceed to ratify the Brexit deal constructively. But this will clearly not be completed before the 29th of March. So, George Eustice, basically, Theresa May, it sounds like she's telling the European Union she wants another go next week. There'll be some reassurances, probably for the DUP. Do you think a delay is right?
Well, I think it was wrong for Parliament to pass those motions, effectively saying that we are too scared to leave without an agreement, and then secondly sending our Prime Minister to Brussels on her hands and knees to basically beg for an extension. And there's a legitimate question, which is, what is the purpose of a short extension? Now, if we do get the withdrawal agreement through, and I'm voting for it, I'm not massively enthusiastic about it, there are problems with it, but I will vote for it. If we do get that through, well, then there's a purpose to a short delay. But if we don't get that withdrawal agreement through, you do have to ask yourself the question, what is the purpose of a short delay? And I think a long delay would be a terrible humiliation for our country after all of this. We've actually done a huge amount of preparation to leave without a deal if necessary, and we should be willing to if necessary.
You previously said that you don't like the idea of a no-deal Brexit, but now you're saying it is an option that you would support.
Well, I've always said I would rather have an orderly Brexit, and so I've always supported leaving with an agreement. But, you know, from the beginning, the Prime Minister has been undermined by Parliament in this negotiation, with lots of mixed messages coming from Parliament. And frankly, the European Union have not behaved in good faith during these negotiations. They've said in terms that they won't even discuss a future partnership until after we've left. And so I do think you have to be willing and have to have the courage, if necessary, to walk away from negotiations. Otherwise, you will never actually get a good deal at all. And I've been arguing now that if this deal does not go through, there is one option left, and that is to switch to the EFTA pillar, the European Free Trade Association that the UK founded in 1959, and actually rely on existing rights under the EEA Treaty in a relationship similar to Norway.
Vera Hobhouse, what do you think of an extension? Obviously, George has his argument for what he thinks we should do next. I'm guessing you disagree.
I think we should have a long extension. I have been passionately campaigning to stay in the European Union. I have been founder member for Bath for Europe. I'm flying the flag of, after all, the 48% of people who voted to stay in the European Union and the people who are coming more and more around to the fact that we should stay in the European Union. And what really frustrates me is that that argument is almost vilified. And yet I am representing at least 50% of the people who want to stay in the European Union. So that this argument has been so entirely sidelined is very frustrating. So I believe we should have a long extension. We should actually finally discuss properly what options there are, and then put a deal that is negotiated back to the people.
If we were to have an extension to allow for a second referendum, which Parliament voted against last week, may have an opportunity to vote for it next week, but would that not just increase the uncertainty? Because we would need months to organise a referendum. We don't know the result of it in reality, do we? And it would just be more uncertainty for the very businesses that are probably writing to all of you complaining about uncertainty.
Absolutely, but the uncertainties are not going to finish with Theresa May's deal either. And that is the sad reality we are in. Obviously, this tale has also been sold to us and to the public that this is going to finish uncertainty. It's not going to do anything like that. The greatest certainty we'll have if actually we continue as members of the European Union or with a very, very close relationship to the European Union. I personally have always argued for staying in the EU, but the biggest certainty, if a deal was ultimately agreed, and I know that the Labour Party is looking at a much closer relationship, for me that would be a completely pointless Brexit, but hey ho, that would be something that maybe Parliament agrees. I think there would actually be a majority in Parliament for that. And you have just told us that you have changed your mind. People and parliamentarians change their mind. People should be allowed to change their mind, which is why this argument about it's not democratic, to put the deal back to the people is undemocratic, I don't get that argument.
What do you think should happen with, assuming European Union leaders in the next few hours and tomorrow agree to it, what do you think a delay should look like?
I would be very hesitant to agree to a short delay because I just don't think there'll still be time to sort out all the things that would need to be sorted out. I mean, there's so many contingencies. We need to know whether she would get her deal through next week. I think that's unlikely. But I voted against triggering Article 50 2 years ago because I thought the government was woefully ill-prepared to start the countdown towards Brexit. I think I've been totally vindicated in that decision to do that because despite what George says, there was this huge amount of effort being put into preparations for no deal, which when you think of the money and the resources and the time of civil servants that's gone into that, it's such a shame that we are focusing our energies on things when we could be concentrated on funding our schools and hospitals and so on. But I think I just think if it was a short delay, we would still be in exactly the same position in 2 months' time, say, facing the same issues, the same lack of preparedness. So I would rather see I'm in the same camp as Vera in that I would rather see Article 50 revoked. But if that doesn't happen, then I think year end would be reasonable. Now,
you're quite clear on your opinion. Obviously, your party is a bit more divided. Yesterday, Jeremy Corbyn was invited for a meeting with Theresa May and all of the party leaders in Westminster and didn't turn up because of because a member of the independent group was at that meeting. Is this really a grown-up conversation to try and sort out Brexit that he didn't turn up to?
Well, I think it would have been better if he had. I gather he turned up and then left. I think it would have been better if he'd stayed. But at the same time, the idea that the Prime Minister is only just now, with a few days to go, bringing people around the table. She should have been having these conversations, before Article 50 was even triggered. There's so many things, like the Northern Ireland situation. Why wasn't those discussions, why didn't we sort of get to the place where we'd almost worked out what would work for Northern Ireland before we started the clock ticking? So I think he should have stayed in the meeting, but at the same time, I think it's quite a cosmetic exercise, her holding the meetings at the moment, because, it's far too late to get a deal sorted and get consensus across the House before next week.
She's now blaming MPs for our indulgence. That is just unacceptable. If anything, it's the indulgence of her own party. But I believe it's her complete failure to sort of run this process properly. Well,
a sign of how divided that party is. I'll come to you in one moment, George. But obviously the ERG, this is Group Brexiteers, led by the North East Somerset MP Jacob Rees-Mogg. They're not very happy about the idea of delay. Let's hear from one of those members.
My right honourable friend and this House gave its solemn word to the British people that we would leave the EU on the 29th of March, on Friday week. What guarantee can you give the British people that at the end of June, if we still do not have a deal, we honour that referendum result and we leave?
Because essentially what we're doing is constructing a short gangplank from the edge of the cliff, and it's still the same choice, but just a few weeks down the line it's sort of sign the Prime Minister's deal or fall off into no deal. Parliament could not have made it clearer on 3 occasions that it absolutely does not want no deal.
So, George Eustice, Richard Drax there effectively worried that Brexit may never happen. Sarah Wollaston saying, well, no deal is just going to be a few more months away. Who's right? Is Brexit at risk?
I think it is if we delay, because I think there's also a danger that the European Union say we're not giving you an extension beyond the end of May, and if you don't want to go through this, then you have to revoke it altogether, and that really would be a catastrophe. Because coming back to those who say that we should have a second referendum, there's no point having a second referendum if Parliament frankly lacks the integrity to honour the results of the first one. And we've been arguing about this now solidly for 3 years. The Brexit debate's been raging for 3 years. It's exhausted you in the media, it's exhausted us in Parliament, and it's certainly exhausted the country. And it is time now to get this done and work out a way of expediting our Brexit in an orderly way. And I think that can still be done by relying on our existing membership of the EEA, rather like the Norway model. And we can still do that. It's not too late. We can do that within 3 to 6 months.
I think we do need to pull George up on saying that we lack integrity. I mean, we're representing our constituents. We're doing what we think
But we still don't know
best
what's going to happen a week on Friday. And because of the way you're all voting, with all different reasons to do that.
But that is down to the way that the government has handled the negotiations and triggered the process. We have, we are just trying to make sure that we do not put our constituents in a worse economic position. We don't, hamper the aspirations of young people who want to live and work and travel abroad. There's, and the fact that we're at this cliff edge, and that Theresa May is using the threat of no deal and that cliff edge exit to blackmail us, doesn't mean that you should be. We're still acting with the utmost integrity by doing the right thing.
My point's a slightly different one. It would be the first time in our history that we've ignored a referendum result and said to people, vote again until you give us the answer we want. And that, I think, is an important issue, and it would be a serious blow to our democracy. My view is...
I don't think you'd have been saying that if it had gone the other way, George.
No. Well, if it had gone the other way, we wouldn't be having this argument. The result would have been respected by people like me. But I think there is an issue here that the way to recognise that, yes, it was a close result, 52 to 48. The way to do that is to put in place the right type of partnership that addresses the concerns and fears of those who are scared of change and who are apprehensive about this move into a different world. And that's why something like the EEA actually is the right settlement.
Because you would
leave the EU, but you would retain a close partnership.
So I would say, precisely because it was so close, why has the whole of the Remain camp, and it is half of the people, more or less, being completely ignored, completely shut out, completely silenced out of this discussion? And we could have had a much more constructive debate about a relationship with the European Union that would have actually allowed the Remain side to be heard. But we weren't, and this is where it all gone wrong.
I can agree on that much. I think with hindsight, I think actually what the Prime Minister probably should have done after the 2017 election, when it was clear there was no overall majority in Parliament, was actually to set up some sort of cross-party task force and try to establish where there was a consensus, what type of settlement Parliament could gather around, so that we could go to that negotiating table with clarity about what Parliament would support.
But the problem is the focus has always been on the problems within the Conservative Party. The reason the referendum was called in the first place was to appease certain elements in the Conservative Party. The reason Article 50 was triggered prematurely was because of that, and it's still, the focus has always been on that.
Not really,
and
Kerry,
the idea that she is now reaching out to other parties and getting them around the table with a week to go.
Some of us within government were arguing for a slightly more agile approach, and for us to reconsider the approach that she'd embarked upon. And I can't necessarily defend the way the Prime Minister's got us to where we have. She's been tenacious, she's been resilient, but she has shown a lack of agility, I'll grant that much.
And of course, stuck in the middle of all of this, as you are the people who voted for you, and we've been out on One High Street in Bristol, just working out what people think about what's going on here in Parliament.
Okay.
I think it was done not really to sort out the problem of in or out of Europe. It was done to sort out internal problems in the Conservative Party.
I think it's really important that we stay in Europe. I've been a European all my life as far as I'm concerned, and I think we get a lot from it, culturally and security-wise.
I was a Remainer, and I'm now so cheesed off, I just want to forget it all about it. Whatever happens, happens. I don't care anymore.
And I just think Theresa May has had such an awful job. I feel for her.
I do feel sorry for her.
And I too just want it to just all be over.
Vera Hobhouse, listening to those last two ladies there, they would not vote how you would want them to in a second referendum if we were to have one. Is that not a sort of proof that we just need to move on?
And I mean, in the end, you have your camp, and sometimes it is obviously very important to sort of see beyond that. And it is obviously very regrettable that we cannot take people with us to sort of say, look, we want you to make that last decision. But I think the people must finish what the people have started. And I can't see why more democracy could be less democracy. We are asking the people again, and if these ladies want to vote the way they want to vote, that's fine.
Well,
they can do that.
They didn't actually say that they wouldn't vote. If the options on the ballot paper were Remain or Theresa May's deal, I would hope that if there was a second referendum, it'd be much better informed. There would be much more campaign, a lot more discussion.
And people can confirm. They can confirm their vote, but asking them again surely must be the right way forward.
We assume you will all get another meaningful vote next week. One of the amendments will be put forward by a couple of your colleagues, which would be to back Theresa May's deal, but on the condition that there is a second referendum, although they're not calling it that.
The Kyle Wilson amendment.
Yes, which would be between Remain and Theresa May's deal. Could you support that?
I think I would be, so long as she could be trusted to keep the promise. This is the problem that if and I think also it'd have to be linked to an extension of Article 50, obviously, to allow that. But yeah, I think I'd probably be inclined to support that, on condition that those options were put to the people.
And would that bring the Liberal Democrats to vote for that as well?
Well, yeah, we've said that something has to be on the ballot paper, so it's always the final say on the deal. So if that's the deal that's put before the people against staying in the European Union, absolutely, but we obviously have to still be in the European Union. We can't do it afterwards. So before we leave the European Union, we have got a people's vote. We need an extension, of course. It can't be afterwards.
A second referendum is beginning to look a lot more likely, isn't it, George Eustace?
I don't think so. There isn't support for that in Parliament. But what there is support for, in my view, is a settlement that is based around relying on our existing membership of the EEA, so a step back from the European Union, leaving the EU institutions but remaining party to that treaty, and then agreeing an alternative customs arrangement on the Northern Ireland border. I actually think there's a large number in the Labour Party that might come around to that, and there could be a settlement in that space.
That's basically you end up as rule takers, not rule makers, and I don't see that there's much support for that in the Labour Party.
It's what I said. Yeah. I think actually you're right. There's possibly an agreement on that, but it would be a completely pointless Brexit. It really would. I mean, what's the point?
Well, that's not true. We would take back control of agriculture. We'd take back control of fisheries. We'd have an independent trade policy. We would take around half of EU law, but the other half we wouldn't take. You only have alignment on some regulations, and there are lots of avenues to influence for non-EU members in the EEA agreement.
I mean, you've all spent a lot of time debating Brexit in the House of Commons over the past few years, but certainly the past week or so. And I'm getting a sense a number of people are getting just a bit frustrated that there is nothing is moving forward. Let's hear from one of your colleagues who was speaking yesterday.
The people did vote to come out, and all this obfuscating is only delaying that. And would he agree with me that we have to consider business, and the longer we dispute and discuss and debate and the less we come together, the more difficult it is for the economy and our businesses.
George Eustace, when you campaigned to leave the European Union, did you think the uncertainty we're seeing now would happen if the vote went the way it did?
No, and I don't personally think it needed to be this way. And mistakes have been made on both sides. I think the Prime Minister should, at a much earlier stage, have identified where the consensus in Parliament lay, especially after she didn't get the majority she was seeking after the 2017 election. But also, the European Union have been culpable in this. They've deliberately set these talks up to fail. They refused to discuss the withdrawal agreement until we had agreed to write out a cheque and give them cash. They've refused even now to discuss what a future partnership might look like until we've left. So they've deliberately created petty rules and processes and procedures to frustrate these talks. It need not have been as difficult as it's been.
Well, since our last programme, which was in February, there have been no fewer than 14 votes on various aspects of Brexit and countless amendments too. So, as well, there was also a second meaningful vote, all of which saw heavy defeats for Theresa May's plan. Now, in her first meaningful vote, 28 of our MPs voted for the deal, whereas 22 voted against. But in the second meaningful vote, that changed to 33 for the deal and 17 against. 5 of the people who changed are St Ives MP Derek Thomas, Scott Mann in North Cornwall, Johnny Mercer, Plymouth Moor View, Steve Doubleson, Osler Newquay, and Sir Hugo Swire in East Devon. George, we assume this vote's going to come back next week. Do you think more of your colleagues in the West Country will vote for them them. Jacob Rees-Mogg is on the fence at the moment, for example.
Yes, I think more will, and I've detected there's been some softening, and even though people have deep reservations about the withdrawal agreement she's brought back, I think they do fear that we might lose Brexit altogether, so I think a number will come across. However, I don't think it will be enough for her to get the deal through. So for me, the real issue that may emerge this week is whether the Prime Minister is willing to make an accommodation with the Labour front bench to land a final settlement that Parliament can unite behind.
That would anger a lot of your colleagues. How long is Theresa May going to be our Prime Minister and your party leader for, do you think?
Well, I've no idea. And to be honest, the nature of the political crisis that, frankly, we are staring into in this next week, I think conventional kind of arguments about whether a Prime Minister can or cannot survive are largely a side issue, because we really do have a huge decision to make over this next week. Whether we can get an agreement with Parliament and get this debate finally settled and put to bed over the next few months, or actually whether we're going to just carry on tearing ourselves apart as a country for another 2 years and having another referendum at the end of it, which I think would be horrendous.
Kerry McCarthy, could anything Theresa May say in the next week convince you to vote for her deal without the condition of a second referendum?
I don't think the deal would be good for my constituents or for the country, but certainly the thing that wouldn't convince me was the statement that she made yesterday on the steps of Downing Street, where she basically blamed everyone but herself for the crisis that's now facing us, and that is not the way to try to win over MPs, and I think it upset a lot of people in her own party as well. It was complete political ineptitude apart from anything else.
But in that statement, Vera Hobhouse, Theresa May was trying to reach out almost above MPs' heads to the people who might be fed up of talking about Brexit. Was the message behind her not something you can listen to?
Well, I think it was very misjudged, and in fact to whip up the people against Parliament I think is a very dangerous thing to do. I mean, we are already living in very febrile times. MPs are getting death threats. So at that moment to whip up even more discontent with the people, for the people with Parliament, was a very misjudged thing to do and made a lot of people angry. In fact, she did the same at PMQ, and I raised it at that point. I think she shouldn't do that sort of thing. And I mean, I'm clear. I'm an anti-Brexiteer. I think we should stay in the European Union. I'm not going to vote for her deal. I stick to my guns.
Was it a mistake, Theresa May's speech last night?
I wouldn't have done it that way, but I think the point is what was coming out in that speech was her deep frustration that I don't doubt is genuine. Everyone feels frustration about this, but her deep frustration that she can't get people to rally behind her deal. But, you know, ultimately, for the next week, the constituency she's got to address is in Parliament, because Parliament needs to get behind and achieve a settlement here. And that's why talking to the MPs, frustrating that may be, is what she's going to have to do.
In a word, do you think we will leave the European Union, whether it's next week, June or whenever?
I'm an optimist, so I would say yes.
Yes or no?
I continue to hope that we are not going to leave.
Yes or no?
I continue to hope we won't.
All right, well, there we are.
I wouldn't put money on it either way.
And we are fresh out of time. Thank you all very much. Thank you for watching. We will be back next month. For now, though, good night.